Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, October the 29th, 2020. Just to let you know that in approximately 90 minutes at 5:30 Pacific time, I will be discussing Robert Wise's 1963 psychological horror film, The Haunting. Today, I'm going to start with a story from Canada. Canada's top doctor calls for structural change to address COVID-19 inequities. This is from Rachel Aiello at CTV News. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, is calling for a structural change across health, social, and economic sectors in the wake of COVID-19 in a new report highlighting the successes and shortfalls in the country's pandemic response to date. She told reporters, "I do see COVID-19 as a catalyst for a collaboration between health, social, and economic sectors, and I've observed at the federal level, but also at local levels and provincial levels." Tam said that while there are examples of decisions taken that begin to address some of these shortcomings, such as increasing affordable housing availability and financial supports for low-income and precarious workers, these policies should be extended past the emergency phase of the pandemic. What I'm really keen to see is that this continues. The report is calling for this to be a more sustained approach. Why can't we have those governance structures beyond the crisis and into recovery? In the Public Health Agency's annual report made public on Wednesday, Tam offers new insights and statistics related to Canada's battle against the novel coronavirus over the last several months and the serious threat the virus continues to pose. For example, in Canada, 80% of COVID-19 related deaths have been residents of long-term care facilities. 19% of national cases are among healthcare workers, and 92% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients had at least one underlying health condition. The annual report is entitled From Risk to Resilience, an Equity Approach to COVID-19. And whenever you hear that word, equity, you know that evil things are being planned. The report gives an overview of COVID-19's consequences so far. It also includes recommendations on how to improve the country's pandemic preparedness, response, and recovery. The report says the structural change should include improving employment conditions and conditions inside long-term care homes, increasing access to housing, as well as enhancing Canadians' ability to access social and health services, both in person and online. Tom says she hopes that in future pandemic planning, it can't be just a health and public health, making it known that all other departments and different sectors and different aspects of society need to be part of the response. We need to sort of build it in explicitly so that, future pandemics and health crises have those other supports come into play immediately. As Tam argues, Canadians' health depends on their social and economic well-being, and the severity of COVID-19 illness may be influenced by their access to these kinds of supports. No one is protected until everyone is protected, Tam said in the report. And that is totalitarian nonsense. It's sinister. Tam's overall recommendations are distilled into three calls: sustaining governance at all levels for structural change in health, social, and economic sectors. The report notes that the health of people in Canada was not equal before COVID-19, and it is not going to be equal after COVID-19 either. That is the nature of healthcare. But that the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated existing shortcomings. Tam suggests that more data needs to be collected and used to inform policy decisions to eliminate inequities and mitigate some potential long-term pandemic impacts. Harnessing the power of social cohesion to control and minimize the virus's spread. She suggests this can be done by leaders sharing evidence and information to provide Canadians with confidence in taking public health precautions such as mask wearing and strengthening public health capacity. Tam says that more work is needed to ensure Canada's public health system is able to handle case surges while having the capacity to deal with non-COVID-19 health issues, including re-evaluating, quote, what sustained investments in the future of public health would look like. Yes, and she goes on to talk about the second wave, or the second resurgence, where she says a lot of cases are in the younger adult population, but what we're seeing is that it's beginning to permeate through other age groups, including the elderly. No, it was the elderly who were the low-lying fruit, who were struck down by COVID-19. COVID-19 has very little effect on few people under the age of 50. And these cases that she talks about are not cases in the sense that cases have traditionally been understood. Oh, she says the virus is very sneaky. Again, the pathetic fallacy that this virus has agency, that it is somehow vicious. What do we know about this Theresa Tam woman? Well, for a start, she's not a Canadian. I'll read from Wikipedia here. Born in 1965, she currently serves as the third Chief Public Health Officer of Canada. She was born in Hong Kong and grew up in the United Kingdom. She attended medical school at the University of Nottingham, earning a BMBS. She completed her pediatric residency at the University of Alberta and a pediatric infectious disease fellowship at the University of British Columbia. She was the co-chair of a 2006 federal report on pandemic preparedness in the wake of the SARS outbreak in Canada. And not listed here is an appearance that she made in a documentary in 2010, where she talks about the possibility of concentration camps for Canadians who refuse to adhere to public health mandates. What does she have to say about COVID-19 when it first became noticed? On January the 7th, 2020, when it appeared there was a health crisis emerging in Wuhan, China, Tam advised Canadians, quote, "There has been no evidence to date that this illness, whatever it's caused by, is spread easily from person to person. No healthcare workers caring for the patients have become ill, a positive sign." At the end of January 2020, Tam said, "No reason to be overly concerned about COVID-19. On January 23rd, Tam was a member of the World Health Organization committee that broadcast that it was too early to declare a public health emergency of international concern. On January 26th, she said, "There is no clear evidence that this virus is spread easily from person to person. The risk to Canadians remains low." January 27th, Canada confirmed its first case. On January 29th, she told Canadians, "It's going to be rare, but we are expecting cases." She also said at this time that the real virus, the real deadly virus, was xenophobia, racism, particularly anti-Chinese racism. She was not keen on masks and didn't think they were useful, but on April the 6th, she changed her recommendation to wearing a non-medical mask, even if you have no symptoms, is an additional measure that you can take to protect others around you in situations where physical distancing is difficult to maintain because of new data about pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic transmission. Tam had previously recommended against wearing masks because, quote, "It can sometimes make it worse if the person puts their finger in their eye or touches their face under the mask, and that it can give a false sense of security." So Theresa Tam is one of these public health wallahs who have come to the fore with COVID-19. And you can see the agenda here. What she is calling for is pretty much a public health dictatorship in my country. This wasn't a crisis, she said early in the year, but as they say, never let a crisis go to waste. We must have systemic changes in Canadian society. In other words, government must become ever bigger and ever more powerful. That you think that, well, I guess 2020 has revealed that there is simply no aspect of human life that governments will not interfere with, even the most basic. For instance, one's ability to leave one's home, I don't know, to go to the park, to go to the beach, to go to the pub, to go to a restaurant. This Chief Latrine Wallah, there is no aspect of Canadian life that she does not seek to control, and it is long past time that this impudent foreigner was put in her place. She is not elected, but as I've mentioned previously, the fact that she is not elected, rather like the Supreme Court, say, it gives politicians an out. Oh, no, we're not making the decision. The Supreme Court is. Oh, we're not making this decision. A public health expert is. Well, Theresa Tam is not an expert in epidemiology. She's just sort of, she's a health bureaucrat. She's a professional bureaucrat. But for a long time, I've been rather dubious about the growth of the public health establishment. For instance, it's now a commonplace for public health agencies to send nurses or the like to visit mothers with newborns. And they ask them a barrage of questions. Do you read to your child? And they're looking to ascertain the level of motor skills that the child has and the like. In effect, they're spying on mothers and their children, and they will file their reports. And if one of these officious women believe that the mother is not up to snuff in some way, this will go down on her permanent record. We see that governments around the world have used COVID-19 as a pretense in order to cement their control over the lives of everyday people. And I don't think that it's an accident that these same latrine wallahs are telling us that, oh, how long is the lockdown going to end? Oh, 2021, 2022, maybe never. Because they want us terrified. They want us to be utterly dependent on government. They want us to be estranged from our families and from our communities. They are determined to, society has already become vitiated over the decades, and the latrine wallahs are determined to destroy society and instead replace it with a top-down regime led by bureaucrats, latrine wallahs. And structural change, could structural change include a guaranteed basic income, a UBI? Yes. We don't need a middle class anymore. We'll just pay people, $1,500, $1,200, $2,000 a month, and thus they will become utterly dependent on government because, as we've discovered during COVID-19, there are tens of millions of so-called inessential jobs. Now, the idea that a government outside of war conditions could determine what is inessential, but I'll note that even during the height of the Blitz in London, restaurants were not closed, pubs were not closed. Apparently, COVID-19 is a greater threat than having one's city leveled. And this threat is never ending because COVID-19 is such a sneaky, such a vicious virus. Well, it's no different than any other kind of virus. And the facts that she put in this report, they simply take the bottom out of her whole argument. 80% of COVID-19 related deaths have been residents of long-term care facilities. This was botched in Canada. That is to say, the handling of COVID-19 in long-term care facilities, where in many cases, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, the workers there simply fled, leaving the old people to their own devices. 92% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients had at least one underlying health condition, and the one underlying health condition, which is most relevant to dying of COVID-19 is obesity, particularly morbid obesity. But I suppose we don't really want to get into that because that's called fat shaming. I suppose Theresa Tam knows, as anyone knows who has investigated this, even on a surface level, that one's weight is the single most important determinant in how long a person will live. Let's take a look at the chat here. Don from Beyond says, I look forward to this all day. Why, thank you. That's very kind of you. Peter Levy says, it has agency and it is also woke, hence why it doesn't affect Black Lives Matters rioters. Chocokin 666, Tim Tam, the flim flam man or woman. Peter Levy adds, and France is still going full speed ahead with Islamification immigration policy. Well, I'll have something to say about France in a few minutes. Metal Mike says, Tam should have been fired after she said massive protests against racism were fine during this pandemic. Lil Wayne endorsed Trump. Yes, is there no end to the wonders of 2020, Metal Mike adds, or after she declared that sex with strangers is fine if you wear a mask. Sex with strangers wearing a mask. It is difficult to think of anything more dehumanizing than that, except let's go to British Columbia, my own province, in which our chief Latrine, Wallah, came out in favor of glory holes. Yes, that actually happened. I'm not going to describe what glory holes are. You can look it up if you like, but you have been warned. Palpcazo 88, Kevin, do you have an official electoral college prediction for Tuesday? No, I don't. I don't make those kind of short-term predictions because there's simply too many variables. Okay, what else do we have here? Lamprey Milt. People are dying. Yes, they are dying. People are always dying. Walrus Libertarian, what does KMG think about the World Economic Forum's proposed Great Reset? Well, yes, the bureaucrats are in charge. The globalists know what is better for us. And there's no question that this this Great Reset will wipe out what is left of the middle class, which is the whole point, as far as I can see. Buddy says, Kevin, why didn't the media notice the caucasity of the World Series winning Dodgers, 8 of 9 starters? Well, the media doesn't like to mention this. There's been this obsession with Dominicans in Major League Baseball for, a couple of decades now. And the latest manager of the Toronto Blue Jays was hired specifically because he is a Spanish speaker and was thought to have do better with Dominicans. I went back about 20 years to look at World Series winners, and I found that not one had a significant number of Dominicans on their team. Baseball is very much a team game, and having a group of players all sitting by themselves and speaking in a foreign language does not seem to me to be conducive to team unity. Metatron says, advocating sex with strangers is a mask, if you think about it. Kevin, didn't you predict in 2016 that Trump would get 60% of the vote? Says Anran, I don't think I did. I think by 2016 I had decided that I wasn't going to make these short-term decisions. Oh, so what does Angela Merkel have to say? This is according to Agence France Presse. German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Thursday defended tough new shutdown measures her government has announced against the coronavirus, warning that propaganda and conspiracy theories undermine the fight against the pandemic. Oh, yes. Is this coming? I would not be surprised if Germany were to criminalize any dissenting views on masks, lockdowns, social distancing, and the like. That seems to be the German way since 1945, enforcing consent by banning all dissenting opinions. The popular Merkel called on Germans to rally behind her in respecting the restrictions and to reject those who refuse to follow the established science in combating the spread of the disease. Let's make this clear, that there's a planted axiom here in all these stories, the fight against the pandemic. Ooh, yeah, take that, COVID-19. We're not going to put up with any of your malarkey. No, it's not a fight against the pandemic. It's a fight against society. It's a fight against the economy. That's what it is. It's not as if we're expected to believe that the coronavirus is like the bug in the old Raid commercials. Raid! Oh no, lockdowns, and they shrivel up and die. That is not how it works. Merkel told the lower house of parliament, "Let me be clear, lies and disinformation, conspiracy and hate damage not only democratic debate, but also the fight against the coronavirus." Hate. Is she talking about unpleasant things about China, said about China? How exactly would those damage the fight against the coronavirus? When you hear anyone use this word disinformation, you are dealing with a person who is determined to eliminate free speech. The speech was interrupted by jeers from the ranks of the far-right AfD, Alliance for Deutschland Party, which prompted a rare intervention from the Speaker of the House, Wolfgang Schäuble, who threatened unruly MPs with penalties. Yeah, do they have some sort of enabling order in the German constitution? Merkel agreed with Germany's 16 state leaders in a video conference Wednesday to shutter restaurants, bars, cinemas, theaters, gyms, and public pools, among other leisure facilities, for the month of November in a bid to halt the surge in new infections. And not even the Nazis or the Stasi did that. Shops, nurseries, schools, shops, nursery shops, and other essential businesses will remain open. Okay, restaurants, bars, cinemas, theaters, gyms, and public pools are not essential, but shops are. Oh, okay, what kinds of shops? Liquor stores, say? To give one example. Merkel won broad backing across the political spectrum, but industry groups warned that small business in particular would have trouble surviving despite 10 billion euros in earmarked state aid. Protests by corona skeptics have also multiplied across the country in recent months, sometimes erupting in violence. Merkel told deputies Thursday, with new cases doubling over the last week and intensive care units quickly nearing capacity. We keep hearing that, but it never happens. The measures we are adopting are appropriate, necessary, and proportional, she said. At the beginning of the cold time of the year, we find ourselves in a dramatic situation. Her aim was to decrease personal contact among Germans to an absolute minimum. Oh dear, an absolute minimum, because we don't need society. All we need is government and big business. They will take care of all of our human needs. And anyway, man's not a social animal. Where did you hear that? That sounds like something a communist would say. Social animal. I mean, really. Oh, yes. This is from CNBC, Sam Meredith. A variant of the coronavirus that is believed to have originated in Spain has spread across Europe and now accounts for most of the new cases reported in several countries in the region, according to the findings of a new study. due to be published on Thursday, not yet peer-reviewed. Details an international team of scientists which has been closely monitoring the coronavirus through its genetic mutations. Coronaviruses are always mutating. So we're going to have a vaccine against the coronavirus. Well, the common cold is a coronavirus. And imagine how many billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, pharmaceutical companies could make if they came up with a vaccine for the common cold. They have never been able to come up with a vaccine for the common cold for the reason that it is constantly mutating. Oh no, it's the novel coronavirus. We need to be locked down forever, maybe even longer. Oh, what do we have here? Governor Andrew Cuomo said Thursday on ABC's The View that President Donald Trump was responsible for every death in the country from the coronavirus pandemic. This is a grossly irresponsible talk. It's politically based, of course, and it's personally based because Cuomo is personally responsible for God knows how many deaths at long-term care facilities and old age homes in the state of New York. But ascribing every single death to President Trump, what did he run around the country at supersonic speed, personally coughing in the face of 220,000 people? A despicable man. Here is a story from Edwin Mora of Breitbart. More research is necessary to definitively determine the protective efficiency of cloth masks against the Chinese virus. A report in the U.S. Centers for Disease Control's Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal recently noted. A report published in the peer-reviewed journal's October 2020 edition indicated that there is no conclusive evidence showing cloth masks help protect users against the coronavirus, suggesting the science on the subject is not yet settled. A quote, more research on cloth masks is needed to inform their use as an alternative to surgical masks/respirators in the event of shortage or high demand situations. To our knowledge, only one randomized controlled trial has been conducted to examine the efficacy of cloth masks in healthcare settings, and the results do not favor use of cloth masks. More randomized controlled trials should be conducted in community settings to test the efficacy of cloth masks against respiratory infections. The general public should be educated about mask use because cloth masks may give users a false sense of protection. Where have we heard that phrase? Because of their limited protection against acquiring infections. Still, CDC has recommended cloth masks for public use, urging Americans to reserve the critical supply of more effective medical and N95 respirator face coverings for medical first responders. We are not defenseless against COVID-19, CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield declared in July. Cloth face coverings are one of the most powerful weapons we have to slow and stop the spread of the virus, particularly when used universally within a community setting. Yes, so they don't work. No, there's no proof that they work. Now, what's the other side of this? What are the drawbacks to wearing cloth masks? How about hygiene? How about all this goo from your face and from your mouth and from your lungs being trapped in these masks? Could be bad, perhaps. How about aerosolizing what's inside? How about getting people to ingest more carbon dioxide? Perhaps that could be not such a good thing. But we don't want to get into that. Speaking of masks, Yinon Weiss has a piece today in The Federalists. Masks have become a political tool and a talisman. When COVID-19 hit, governments panicked and created enormous fear. The Centers for Disease Control currently estimates a COVID-19 survival rate of 99.99% for people younger than 50, but the damage created by the panic was too great to undo. It is likely that some politicians eventually realized their mistake and needed a way to backpedal without admitting their lockdowns were a policy disaster. Their solution was for people to put any old piece of cloth across their face and magically believe that it's okay to go out shopping again. Masks are not merely a small inconvenience. They have inadvertently become a key impediment to returning to a more normal life and desirable goal for those seeking to twist the pandemic for political and electoral purposes. Now, I'll just note that there is a road, a 3-lane road, a fair amount of traffic right outside this window I'm looking through, and several hundred people pass by every day. And I noticed that we're up to about 90% of people wearing masks outdoors. How can this possibly help? Well, am I supposed to believe that the COVID-19 virus is, say, a bunch of them, millions of them or whatever, are hanging out by a stop sign, waiting for someone without a mask? Look, he's not wearing a mask. Get him. And they zoom through the air and enter through the nose and the mouth. Got another one. These fools who don't wear masks. The atmosphere is enormous. And, any viruses that are coughed or sneezed or just breathed out into the air are going to float. They're just going to disappear very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. I see people walking alone outside wearing masks. Is the atmosphere sneaky? Is the atmosphere vicious? Is the atmosphere somehow plotting insidiously to kill you? Anyway, back to the Federalist. Masks dehumanize us and ironically serve as a constant reminder that we should be afraid. People can now be spotted wearing masks while camping by themselves in the woods or on a solo sailing trip. They have become a cruel device on young children everywhere. Kindergarten students covered by masks and isolated by plexiglass, struggling to understand the social expressions of their peers. Face coverings are causing real harm to the American psyche, provide little to no medical benefit, and distract us from more important health policy issues. The mask dogma had many cracks in it from the start. For one, the U.S. Surgeon General and the CDC both previously said that, quote, masks are not effective in preventing the general public from catching coronavirus, unquote. So they were already starting with a credibility deficit. Furthermore, many officials have been frequently caught without masks when they think the cameras are off them. Dr. Anthony Fauci, for example, has been caught doing this many times. Chicago's mayor and local media were all caught taking off their masks and violating social distancing as soon as a press conference ended. This was caught in a now deleted YouTube video that was shared by a now deleted Twitter account after being retweeted more than 26,000 times. As of publication date, it is still available to view in a crude video of a video that is yet to be deleted on YouTube. Clearly, some people do not want you to see what politicians do behind the scenes. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, a strong advocate for mandatory masking, was caught off camera laughing about how wearing masks is an act of, quote, political theater, unquote. Let's look at the studies. The Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University summarized 6 international studies which showed, quote, that masks alone have no significant effect in interrupting the spread of ILI or influenza in the general population, nor in healthcare workers, unquote. Oxford went on to say that despite 2 decades of pandemic preparedness, there is considerable uncertainty as the value of wearing masks, unquote. A study of healthcare workers in more than 1,600 hospitals showed that cloth masks only filtered out 3% of particles. An article in the New England Journal of Medicine stated, quote, wearing a mask outside healthcare facilities offers little, if any, protection from infection, and the desire for widespread masking is a reflexive reaction to anxiety over the pandemic. Similar studies have come from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, Cambridge University Press, Oxford Clinical Infectious Diseases, and Influenza Journal, to name just a few. few. Studies do show masks can help in the case of direct respiratory droplets, which would matter if somebody is coughing, breathing, or sneezing directly on your face. That happens normally in a tight and highly confined space. But the plentiful evidence we have indicates masks would not meaningfully help with aerosol transmission where two people are just in the same area or even the same room. This is because the two people end up breathing the same air with or without a mask. Now, yes, I've talked about this before, and he goes through the list of countries, which I have gone through before. What happened after the mask mandates? In Austria, in Germany, in France, in Spain, in the United Kingdom, in Belgium, in Italy, in Europe as a whole, the number of cases exploded after mask mandates. But empirical evidence, what's that? Who cares about empirical evidence? It's all about feelings now. Science is about feelings. Oh, I feel threatened. Yes, okay. There's all sorts of threats. Every time one leaves one's home, one is threatened. You know, you could be knocked over by a car crossing the street. You could get into a car accident. You could slip on a patch of ice and smack your head. All manner of things, all manner of dangers out there. There's all manner of dangers inside one's home. Many people slip in the shower and smack their head, suffer serious injuries, or even die. From lockdown skeptics, Will Jones, a sage, predicts a second wave will be worse than the first. Oh, of course. Of course it has to be worse than the first. Again, how many days do we have left? 30 days in November, 61 and 2, that's 63 days. So we got what, 63 days for another 200,000 Americans to die of COVID-19. It's obviously not going to happen, not even come close. But Joe Biden is putting this out. And as we know, Donald Trump is personally responsible for every single COVID death in the United States. What else do we have here from lockdown skeptics? How COVID deaths are overcounted. Yes, I think we know about that. Hang on a second here. Oh, yes, the second wave has claimed lives of just 17 people under 40. 17 people. How many people live in the United Kingdom? Something like about 65 million people. Oh, and let's look at the how COVID-19 ranks for September 20. Cases of death. Dementia, 4,500. Heart diseases, 4,100. Lung cancer, 2,300. Strokes and blood clots, 2,100. Respiratory diseases, 1,800. Colon cancer, 1,300. Flu and pneumonia, 1,100. Ill-defined conditions, 1,100. Blood cancer, 900. Prostate cancer, 861. And COVID-19 comes in at 690. Yeah. This is the disease which has caused the greatest crisis of what, this century? The greatest public health crisis ever, apparently. Professor Angus Dalgleish had written, we are at a pivotal moment in this pandemic and for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and indeed the country, the stakes could not be higher. With rumors rampant about a new national lockdown and talk about the so-called second wave of COVID-19 infections being deadlier than the first, there has never been a more important time for Boris Johnson to go with his instincts and stand firm against the doom mongers at SAGE. The organization's full name, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, suggests a reassuringly well-informed and authoritative body whose guidance can be followed unquestioningly. Yet the recommendations are often based on flawed evidence, which is far from scientific, and that makes it all the more alarming to learn that they are attempting to bully the Prime Minister into imposing a second lockdown. The pressure is apparently based on projections showing that while the number of COVID deaths will peak at a lower level than in the spring, they will remain at that level for weeks or even months, resulting in more deaths overall. And Professor Carl Hennigan has very little time for the case for a second national lockdown. What happened to learning to live with the virus, he told Mail Online. People calling for lockdown need to realize that it is a blunt tool that will just kick the can down the road. We need to get the message out now that this is not going away. It's about managing COVID-19's impact. Yes, kicking the can down the road. That is a very nice simile. Once again, lockdowns would only work if you sealed people in their living places and kept them there until they were dead. That is the only way that a lockdown could possibly work. Some good news. Influenza-like illnesses, e.g. COVID, are falling. Incidences of them are falling in the Northwest and London. But there's never any good news regarding COVID-19 because it's so sneaky, so vicious. A dissident civil servant has been in touch to explain why civil servants and public sector employees more generally are all full-on lockdown fanatics. 1, they have to follow the direction of the government. It is their duty. 2, senior civil servants cannot speak out, otherwise they break Rule 1. 3, 90% of civil servants are socialists or collectivist thinkers. 4, most civil servants have never worked outside the public sector. 5, they are on full pay regardless of consequences. 6, there are public sector contrarians, and there are those who roll their eyes at the latest madness, but they work in what is essentially a Soviet system, so cannot speak out openly against the great leader's decision. The public sector is also unable to accept alternative views and never engages in red team exercises on any policy. There are no teams set up to dismantle any idea being proposed. And France is due to go into a second lockdown on Friday. I would have thought that France had bigger problems than a COVID-19. Conspiracy theories. A letter to lockdown skeptics. Until the events of this year, I have allied myself for the most part with the political left. I've been a member of the Labour Party and a Guardian watcher, if not quite reader. I have no compunction now in expressing my total abhorrence at the near orgasmic enthusiasm for authoritarian control that has come to dominate the left, and my gratitude for the reason and humanity that have, by contrast, characterized many on the political right. But there is a blind spot on the right which threatens the reason, if not the humanity, of its analyses of the COVID response. It is the insistence that there is no conspiracy afoot and that this whole unfortunate affair is attributable to the blunders of those in power. It seems to me that there is something in this repeated denial of conspiracy theory that is akin to our government's repeated refusal to let the virus rip. It mischaracterizes as silly that which it rejects, and then rejects it because it is silly. Those who argue for the acknowledgement of herd immunity are not for that reason arguing for letting the virus rip. They suggest many and nuanced possibilities for the management of the virus as it tracks through the population. Similarly, those who suggest that there is more to the COVID restrictions than mountains of blunders by politicians and their advisors are not, for that reason, conspiracy theorists. They do not, if they are at all rational, imagine that some bunker somewhere is filled with evil geniuses conducting the whole sorry affair. I am moved to write this now because I've been listening to the excellent podcast featuring James Delingpole and Mike Yeadon, who in their discussion actually admit and articulate well the very thing that almost all so-called conspiracy theorists are trying to point out. Yeadon contributes the phrase convergent opportunism and argues that while there are no bunker geniuses inventing all of this, there are plenty who have availed themselves of the opportunities it has presented and whose doing so has contributed to the escalation and continuation of the mess. Well, Dr. Theresa Tam would be one excellent example of convergent opportunism. Delingpole responds by contributing his own phrase, the concatenation of interests, to describe what he too sees as a contingent but coherent coming together of opportunities for interested parties whose actions then, we presume, exacerbate and extend the conditions which have emerged as so beneficial to them. I just mentioned in this respect, Canada. Before COVID-19, the Trudeau government was under a lot of pressure to do something about its spending because spending has greatly increased since 2015 when Justin Trudeau took power. And the question whether was this level of spending sustainable But the new line is that, well, COVID-19 means that economic laws no longer apply. We can spend ourselves rich, or at least spend ourselves healthy, and no need to worry about budget deficits, no need to worry about debt. Do you want people to die? So, yes, convergent indeed. Let's go back to the chat. Mead is yummy. Metatron. I've never had mead. That's one of those things that I think maybe I should try that, before I die. I'm trying to think of that alcoholic drink that's very popular in Russia. There's not much alcohol in it, but I gather it's very popular indeed. Kvass, is that what it's called? I think I'd like to try that as well. Donald Robertson has a suggestion which is rather funny, but it is too disgusting, so I'm not going to repeat it. YT says, at least we know how idiotic and insane half the population is. Now I have zero expectations of anyone. Yes, but I don't know that it's all that different than it ever was. The problem is that our leaders, our elite, they're supposed to be adults. They're supposed to be responsible. Similarly, the media, which has been accorded tremendous power, has proved itself completely unfit for purpose. Pulpcasso 88 says bus drivers have to wear a mask for their entire shift. That's got to be torture. Yeah, I was thinking of heading, into Vancouver, but that would require a 40-minute light rapid transit journey, which I would have to wear a mask the whole time. And I'm thinking, I really don't want to do that. I really, really don't want to do that. Metatron, Fauci is now saying this might go until 2022. Ottawa Transit spending $6 million to install plexiglass shields on all buses to protect the driver, or plexiglass shields between the bench seats. Yeah. Okay. Metal Mike says they are not wearing masks outdoors because it's the law or even recommended. They do it because they are ignorant. Again, I've mentioned this before, but Michael Crichton wrote a book years ago called Electronic Life, where he mentioned something similar to this, which is that people have a habit of taking flash pictures of the sun, even though the effective range of the flash is 8 to 10 feet, and the sun is 93 million miles away. And I suppose the reasoning is much the same. Well, it can't hurt. Okay. Metatron says, can I get a job picking up all the face masks laying on the ground? They're as common as cigarette butts where I live. Peter Hitchens joked, and perhaps it's not a joke, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that soon we're going to be reading about dolphins and the like choking on masks in the ocean. I really wouldn't be surprised. Let's have a look at what Alex Berenson has to say. This is incredible. The U.S. economy is barely going to contract this year. The 4% estimate is now clearly too high. Many European countries will be down close to 10%. Medicine Hat, that's in Alberta, a Canadian city of 63,000, sees a string of post-lockdown suicides, at least 7 since May. Our suicide data is terrible, so the question, is this just a random cluster, or is suicide rising generally? And a city of this size happens to be large enough for the trend to be notable, and small enough that authorities and media actually do report on it. Oh, yes. Again, what further wonders does 2020 have for us? Oregon health official dressed as clown while announcing coronavirus deaths. Your Department of Pandemia awards Dr. Claire Posh of the Oregon Health Authority a Special Hero Clown of the Virus Award. And on a more personal note, your department loves the polka dots. Attention, citizens. Repealing the 19th Amendment was a mistake. Is there anything that women can do in public that doesn't draw attention to themselves? You're talking about dead people, and you are literally dressed as a clown. The polka dot blouse, and yeah, that makeup all over your face. Of course, the mayor of Chicago was talking about coronavirus, and she dressed up as a superhero. Yes, this is another woman, the mayor of Chicago, Laurie Lightfoot. Don't look her up on Google image search. She will haunt your dreams if you do so. And the latest from France. You know, Charles de Gaulle surrendered Algeria to the Algerians, even that part which had never been inhabited by them, which is full of oil and gas, because he said that this was ultimately not sustainable, and that he saw this as a threat to the traditional France, to Catholic France. What happened then is really incredible. Close to 1 million pieds noirs, or Blackfeet, who were white, were repatriated or fled in terror from Algeria. But subsequently, millions and millions of Algerians came to France. This doesn't make any sense. Algeria was not a colony, it was an integral department of France. So the decision was, no, we are going to have a divorce. It's going to be split up. You have your country, we have our country. No, we want your country too. And apparently, since this is to do with something called multiculturalism, diversity, it's a good thing, and anyone who disagrees is a Nazi. They have to go back. That's simple. From the Daily Mail, terror victim beheaded by Tunisian migrant, more diversity, who killed 2 other worshippers in a church rampage. Macron says France is under attack. 2 more attacks stopped and candlelight vigils held. Enough with the candlelight vigils. They're useless. They're worse than useless. 2 terror attacks have hit France. The first at the Notre Dame Basilica in Nice, and the second in Avignon. Vincent Laux, 45, a sacristan of the Notre Dame Basilica in the city of Nice, was killed as he prepared for the first mass of the day after 21-year-old Tunisian migrant Brahim, this is a tough name to pronounce, Al-Sassour or something, I'm not even going to try. French anti-terror prosecutors said the unpronounceable Tunisian attacked worshippers in the heart of the Mediterranean resort city with a foot-long blade, slitting the throat of an elderly woman in an apparent beheading attempt. Meanwhile, a guard at the French consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, was stabbed and wounded by a knifeman. 2 other men were arrested, one carrying a knife near a church in Sartreville and another with a knife in Lyon. Attacks come after President Emmanuel Macron sparked fury by defending cartoons of the Prophet Mohammed. People will say, oh, well, you compare terrorist deaths to other causes of death. Other causes of death are not terror-related. The whole point of terror-related deaths is that they inspire terror in people. That one is shopping, walking down the street, attending a Christmas market, and then there is a fear that you are going to be attacked, stabbed, run over, or whatever, pretty much because of the color of your skin. And what's even worse is that to suggest obvious measures such as, well, we're cutting off immigration, or my suggestion that all of these people be offered 50,000 euros to leave permanently, subject to biometric ID taken and signing of a pledge that they understand that should they ever enter France again, they will be imprisoned for, 6 months or a year, and then deported again. Let's see, again from the Mail, picture Tunisian migrant Islamic terrorist 21 who beheaded woman and killed 2 more Catholics in Nice church rampage. And here we have pictures of him. This story happens again and again and again. You know, the slogan is death to those who insult Islam. Well, France is officially a secularist state. This Notre Dame Basilica in Nice belongs to the French government. All churches in France belong to the French government because they were all seized by the French government in 1905. The French government decided at that time that no, we do not hold any one religion higher than the other. The state is at the top. But no, the Muslims, they're not willing to live with this. This is from the New York Post. Jeroen Steinboek. French police foiled another attack by stopping a man near a church in a suburb of Paris after he told his father he wanted to do as in Nice. The suspect was arrested near the Saint-Martin's church in Sartreville, where he was believed to be in possession of a knife, Le Parisien reported. Alerted by the man's father about the alleged plot, police rushed to the scene and arrested the man in his vehicle, according to the news outlet. Yes, we are constantly told that secularization, and the delights of the great Satan are going to mean that we don't need to worry about these migrants, particularly subsequent generations. It is exactly the opposite. It is the most religious of these people who represent the least threat. The 9/11 conspiracists, oh yes, they went to strip bars, they consumed pornography, they drank alcohol, and they felt bad about this. They felt ashamed. They felt that they had been dragged into the mire by America, by the great Satan. And they came to the conclusion there was one great act that they could perform in absolution. So no, corrupting these people, it doesn't help. It only makes things worse. Oh, and a prominent Muslim leader has spoken out on this, and you won't believe what he has to say. Let's see. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who became notorious, about 20 years ago, when he had some spicy things to say about the Jews. This is from Leah Ustasowicz in the New York Post. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia said Muslims have a right to be angry and kill millions of French people just hours after an attacker yelled Allahu Akbar, beheading one woman and killing 2 others in a church in France. The incendiary comments were part of a tweet storm from Dr. Mohammed, who railed against Western culture and French President Emmanuel Macron for refusing to denounce the caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad that have sparked 3 attacks in 2 months in France. Macron has also vowed to fight Islamist separatism in the wake of the beheading of school teacher Samuel Paty in a French suburb October 16. Macron is not showing that he is civilized. He is very primitive in blaming the religion of Islam and Muslims for the killing of the insulting school teacher. It is not in keeping with the teachings of Islam, Mohammed tweeted. It's not, is it? Okay, there seems to be some controversy about that. But irrespective of the religion professed, angry people kill. The French, in the course of their history, have killed millions of people. Many were Muslims. Muslims have a right to be angry and to kill millions of French people for the massacres of the past. Okay, I'm going to stop here now. So all these Muslims come to France, and they have a right to be angry and to kill millions of people for the massacres of the past. Don't let them in. Why would a country let in people who were angry from the start and had a grudge against the country, which was kind enough to admit them? Oh, yes. Someone, and under 16, tweeted regarding this. I would guess that this person is a Muslim from Africa, or perhaps just a black man from Africa. And it's a cartoon of a chicken in the red, white, and blue of the French flag. And it is eating a corn, which is in a sack shaped like the continent of Africa. And the tweet says, "The parasitic country fled by the blood of Africa." If they really believe that, again, if they really believe that, don't let them in, and make all efforts to repatriate those who are already there. I responded to this person, "Quand les poules auront des dents," which is a French idiom, which means when chickens get teeth. You know, it's rather the French equivalent of the English idiom, "when pigs fly." Africa produces little except a surplus population. Yeah, and resentment. Cardinal Sarah had something to say. "Islamism is a monstrous fanaticism which must be fought with force and determination. He will not stop his war. Unfortunately, we Africans know this too well. The barbarians are always the enemies of peace. The West today, France, must understand this. Let us pray." The Real Fly commented, "Cardinal about to get canceled." I was talking about resentment. We have this in my own country, even among, particularly among what are called model minorities. Robert Fife and Stephen Chase of the Globe and Mail. A group of Chinese Canadian associations are marking the 70th anniversary of the Korean War by publicly condemning the United States and its allies, including Canada, as aggressors and imperialists, while lauding China for fighting alongside North Korea. More than 26,000 Canadians in the Army, Navy, and Air Force served in the UN-authorized military campaign to defend South Korea from China-backed North Korean forces in the early 1950s. The war claimed the lives of 516 Canadians. Statements praising China's role in the Korean War from 5 Chinese-Canadian organizations were recently posted on WeChat, popular Chinese language social media platform. Apptopia, a firm that tracks mobile services, said WeChat had been downloaded 265,000 times in Canada in 2020 alone. The quotes appeared as part of an article posted by the Come From China News WeChat account in Ottawa. Quote, 70 years ago, the Chinese People Liberation Army and the Korean people fought together to resist the invasion, took the initiative to attack, and achieved victory. Let us remember this great victory, unquote. Wrote Tracy Law, a Vancouver financial advisor and president of the Guangzhou Fellow Students Association of Canada and president of the Guangdong Chinese Chamber of Commerce of Canada. David Berkeson, a University of Calgary historian who wrote a book on the Korean War, said celebrating China's role in that war is akin to glorifying Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939. He said it's particularly offensive because South Korea would be living under a communist dictatorship today if it weren't for the actions of the United States and its allies, including Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. The United States did not start the war. North Korea, with the approval of China and the Soviet Union, did, he said. All right. So the Chinese put China first. This is not surprising to me. What is surprising to me is that we have these people in my country, because clearly they do not put Canada first. A great many of them could be considered to be fifth columnists, looking to suborn Canada to the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah, they have to go back. Oh, and in more They Hate Us news, this is from James Dellingpole in Breitbart. The unknown warrior, the nameless, unidentified body interred in London's Westminster Abbey to represent all the soldiers killed during the Great War, was probably a white person chosen because of unconscious bias. This, I learned from a bizarre story published in the newspapers at the weekend, is the conclusion of curator Justin Saddington at the National Army Museum in London as part of his research for an exhibition on warriors. I find this puzzling. Why do we need to know this? How did this story ever make it into the papers? Let's just briefly remind ourselves of the background. In 1916, an Army chaplain called David Railton conceived the idea of the unknown warrior after seeing a grave marked with the rough cross and the legend scrawled in pencil, an unknown British soldier. 4 years later, bodies were exhumed from various battlefields and brought to a chapel near Arras, France. These remains were then put into 4 plain coffins, each covered with a Union flag. A brigadier with eyes closed then felt his way to one of the coffins, whose occupant was then selected for interment as the unknown warrior. The body now lies in Westminster Abbey, not far from the entrance, in soil brought from each of the main World War I battlefields. The inscription begins, "Beneath this stone rests the body of a British warrior, unknown by name or rank, brought from France to lie among the most illustrious of the land." What exactly does race have to do with this strange, moving, fascinating story? How was it ever allowed to get sullied with the ugly, divisive issue of identity politics? It is a blindingly obvious, well-documented fact that the vast majority of British soldiers who fought in the First World War were white. It seems extremely likely, on balance of probability, that any corpses exhumed from battlefields 2 years after the war had ended were also white. Yet suddenly, mysteriously, this has become contentious. Here's an excerpt from the Telegraph article and reported elsewhere, which turned this non-event into a story. Minutes of meetings of the Memorial Committee tasked with creating the first ever Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Saddington has found, show that Indian and other soldiers were not mentioned. The more ingrained racial biases of the time may have had a bearing on how the dead were commemorated, the research suggests. He told the Daily Telegraph that should be taken as evidence of unconscious bias, really, the fact that they're not discussed. This is a time 100 years ago when racism was much more ingrained. There was, in fact, a color bar for Black officers. There are wider issues with race, and this boils over into the commemoration as well. The National Army Museum in Chelsea is one of the few museums, indeed possibly the only museum in London, that has not fallen victim to woke directors imposing their trendy left-wing narratives on the collection. This is because its director, Justin Majewski, was formerly Director Combat, professional head of the Royal Armored Corps and the Infantry, and won a DSO as a battalion commander in Iraq. Okay, so let's review the bidding here. After the Second World War, Britain, for some strange reason, decides it needs to start importing people from the Caribbean and from the Indian subcontinent. Initially, well, we know the reason. Cheaper wages. Business demanded cheaper wages. Many of these people were hired as bus conductors and the like. What? There was no Britishers who could do these jobs as bus conductors, as the like. By the 1960s, this had become a torrent. And of course, in 1968, Enoch Powell gave his famous Rivers of Blood speech, for which he was vilified. He was the most admired politician in Britain, but the elite decided that he must be destroyed because these people from the Caribbean and from the Indian subcontinent meant, 1, lowest wages, and 2, labor voters. So now the situation in Britain is that its entire history tradition is under attack from immigrants and the sons of daughters of immigrants that Britain very kindly and very stupidly invited. There is no such thing as model minorities. We have different countries for a reason. Let's talk about Glenn Greenwald. The Intercept co-founder Glenn Greenwald announced his resignation from the online publication Thursday after editors reportedly refused to allow him to raise questions about recent scandals plaguing Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. This is from Tristan Justice in The Federalist. Quote, "The Intercept's editors, in violation of my contractual right of editorial freedom, censored an article I wrote this week, refusing to publish it unless I remove all sections critical of Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, the candidate vehemently supported by all New York-based Intercept editors involved in this effort at suppression. The censored article, based on recently revealed emails and witness testimony, raised critical questions about Biden's conduct. He tweeted, "The same trends of repression, censorship, and ideological homogeneity plaguing the national press generally have engulfed the media outlet I co-founded, culminating in censorship of my own articles. The final precipitating cause is that the Intercept's editors censored an article I wrote this week, refusing to publish it unless I remove all sections critical of Joe Biden, the candidate vehemently supported by all Intercept editors involved in this effort of suppression." Okay, so Glenn Greenwald has published on his Substack the piece about Joe Biden. I won't go into it because I'm sure you've heard it all. It's right up to Tony Bobulinski. But what is the point of all this? Well, it seems to me fairly obvious, which is that the mainstream media will not allow any dissenting voices. And even publications which were thought to be mainstream, such as the New York Post in America and the Daily Mail in Britain, are now not respectable because the stultifying elite has decided so. And we're going to see, if Biden wins, we're going to see moves to suppress the New York Post and the Daily Mail, to push them into a Breitbart territory. Boycotts, advertiser boycotts are going to be raised against them, just as advertiser boycotts have been raised against Tucker Carlson and other hosts on Fox. You stop advertising on these platforms or else. Or else what? Well, they don't really specify what the or else is, but the threat is sufficient to terrify these advertisers. Oh, yes, in the latest in Twitter suppression news, and this becomes more fantastical seemingly every day, from the same source at the Federalist, Twitter suspended U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan for a post celebrating the success of the U.S. southern border wall, keeping violent criminals from reaching American communities. Here's another example of what I call the Schrodinger's cat nature of the mainstream media. On the one hand, the wall, there's no wall. Trump hasn't built a wall, and he's never going to build a wall. It was just another one of his many lies. Oh, but the wall is wicked, wicked, wicked. This is what Mark Morgan had written. The Border Patrol, Customs and Border Patrol, continue to build new wall every day. Every mile helps us to stop gang members, murderers, sexual predators, and drugs from entering our country. It's a fact. Walls work. So he was accused of hateful conduct. That's why the tweet was banned. Hi, CBP Mark Morgan. Yes, when I have got messages from Twitter telling me that I've done something naughty and must remove tweets or else, they always begin with hi. Hi? Are we pals? Are we buddies? Are we BFFs? No, and that is Mr. Grace to you. Your account has been locked for violating the Twitter rules. You may not promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. Religious affiliation. Christians are given a very hard time all the time on Twitter. But that doesn't seem to make a difference. Matthew's tweet storm is still up on Twitter. Yes. So, promoting hate is to note a certain facts, of course. This is from Summit News. Steve Watson. As hearings took place before Congress on big tech's use of Section 230 to censor content, The most interesting revelation came from Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, who seemed to admit that the platform relies on outrage mobs to flag up posts that are deemed to be misinformation. Dorsey made the admission as Senator Rick Scott was questioning him, noting, quote, "We don't have a general policy around misleading information and misinformation. We rely upon people calling that speech out," unquote. Megan McArdle commented, "Even Twitter is outsourcing policy making to progressive Twitter." Hunter's Laptop tweeted, "Who yells the loudest gets their way." If I was a bigger troll, said Al Sadius with a bigger following, I'd try to report one of Jack's tweets until it got removed by the algorithm. And Jack Dorsey was making a very big deal about Section 230. Oh no, we need Section 230. We need to Section 230. Yeah, well, maybe you need it. If you need it that badly, you should abide by it. Because Section 230 gives protections to platforms, not to publishers. Publishers are held responsible for defamatory material, for incitement, for intellectual property violations, and the like. This is a story from Katie Faust at the Federalist. Big tech censorship is driving these moms to Trump. How many heard about Twitter and Facebook censoring the Biden-Ukraine story? I asked at our bi-monthly mom meetup circled by kids outfitted with rain boots and homemade bows and arrows. Only 2 hands juggling babies and lattes went up. The other moms rolled their eyes, utterly not shocked that big tech was functioning as their all-knowing nanny again. The conversation quickly brought about familiar examples of media and big tech bias, from censoring infant seizure on Facebook and redirecting to the CDC vaccine page to downplaying riots and demonstrations. When I'm driving with my kids downtown, I need to know if protesters are blocking freeway traffic. To the definition of sexual preference, we don't change the dictionary. If big tech censorship goal is to turn users into political lemmings, these moms with 2 to 7 kids in tow and ranging age 29 to 48 aren't happening. It's incredible when you open your eyes and realize how you've been played by the people that control the internet, a mom and recent immigrant shared. It makes me mad, anxious of not being able to find out what is true anymore. From Emily Jacobs at the New York Post. Joe Biden is shrugging off a torrent of new allegations linking him to his family's allegedly corrupt business practices, calling his son, quote, "the smartest guy I know," unquote, as his brother refuses to take questions on the matter. The smartest guy I know. Maybe, just maybe, taking a nude selfie of yourself while your 14-year-old niece is in a bed behind you is not the sort of thing that the smartest man I know would do. Wednesday, this is Jeff Poor at Breitbart Wednesday on Fox's Tucker Carlson Tonight. The host followed up on his interview with former Biden family confidant Tony Bobulinski, who shared details of Biden family business dealings a night earlier on Fox News. And this word Soviet comes up again. And I don't think that that is inappropriate, given that the term Antifa, short for anti-fascist, is a Soviet coinage. Tucker Carlson said this morning the big papers completely ignored what Tony Bobulinski had to say. So do the other television networks. Not a single word about him appeared on CNN or anywhere else. Newsweek just decided to cover it, but came to the conclusion that the real story was about QAnon somehow. This is Soviet-style suppression of information of a legitimate news story days before an election. The ramifications of it are impossible to imagine, but we do know the media cannot continue in the way that it has. No one believes the media anymore, and no one should. Well, do you think that Tucker Carlson is going to remain on Fox News? Should Joe Biden win the election? I don't think so. I don't think that he will. I think that he will be forced out, because this will be seen as a deliberate insult to the Biden presidency and You do not want to get on the wrong side of those people. From The Guardian, Tucker Carlson has been mocked for his attempt to explain why he could not produce documents he had promised relating to Joe Biden, implying some kind of conspiracy. On Thursday, UPS confirmed that it had indeed lost and then found the package in question. Carlson said the only copy of the papers, which he alleged added to claims about Biden's son Hunter, had been lost. Yes, I heard what he had to say, that this company made extensive investigations, that the package had been opened and the documents removed. And apparently this proves that Chuck Wendig, I don't care what that creep has to say about anything. Oh, this is a big joke, because information never goes missing, not like those 30,000 plus Hillary Clinton emails. Let's see. Sundance at the conservative treehouse has a hypothesis here. As an outcome of the U.S. Patriot Act, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has an agreement in place with mail shipping companies, public-private services, that essentially allows them a portal to track all in-state and interstate mail deliveries. The FBI has access to this data network in the same way the FBI has access to federal transportation records. Just like when you book a flight, and DHS portals are open that allow FBI to track your movements domestically. This type of portal is also accessed in private company transportation like Uber, Lyft, etc. DHS, and as a consequence, the FBI can easily track your whereabouts. Without much hesitation, I will bet the FBI was monitoring the communication of Bobulinski and, by extension, the entire Tucker Carlson production network. Once the shipment was known to be taking place, the DHS portals are opened, the packages tracked, and the FBI moves in to intercept their delivery. You see the sleight of hand here. The fact that further incriminating evidence supposedly disappeared does not mean that there is no evidence against Hunter and Joe Biden, because we have all this evidence already from Tony Bobulinski. Peaceful protests in Philadelphia. Bob Price at Breitbart. Police reports indicate that 18 ATM machines were blown apart during 2 nights of rioting in Philadelphia. The incidents took place as rioters and looters ransacked the city following the shooting of an unarmed black man. Yeah, this is next level looting. Would like a new pair of running shoes, or a new, better smartphone. But see, the thing about money is that it's fungible. You can use it to buy all manner of goods and services. So money is better than a new pair of sneakers. Yes, multiculturalism, it doesn't work. Diversity leads to enmity, which leads to violence. From Lee Brown at the New York Post, Jewish men who said they were trying to show solidarity with BLM protesters were violently chased away by the mob and ridiculed as being part of the synagogue of Satan, according to a disturbing video posted online. Amalek, what y'all down here? You don't live here. Someone asked the man, referencing the Amalek tribe, which the Jewish Virtual Library says was the first enemy of the ancient Israelites. Y'all know we the real Jews, right? Yeah, okay. I've run into these people. I've heard them speak. They just have a rather amazing facility. And also amazing is that every word that comes out of their mouth is completely insane. I was talking about Larry Krasner yesterday. He apparently is not feeling the pinch. From Ross Ibbotson, the Daily Mail, Philadelphia's DA has warned, quote, lawless, power-hungry despot, unquote, Donald Trump not to send his goon squads or the Proud Boys to the city to watch the polls. He threatened the president that if he sent any uncertified poll watchers to the birthplace of American democracy, I've got something for you. The Trump administration's efforts to suppress votes amid a global pandemic fueled by their disregard for human life will not be tolerated in the birthplace of American democracy, Krasner said in a statement. You see how shameless these people are? You would think that the district attorney, who bears a enormous responsibility for the mayhem and destruction in Philadelphia because of his new progressive method of letting criminals go, simply letting them go, not prosecuting them, death threats. How is death threat? How is that a serious crime? Stabbing the mother of your children. How is that a serious crime? It sounds like racism to me, but it was a black man stabbing a black woman. You don't understand systemic racism. You simply don't understand it. Again, Joel Pollack from Breitbart. Supporters of President Trump are being targeted in Coronado, California, the place where I have been. It is an island off San Diego. It is one of the richest places on earth, and it is connected to the mainland with one of the great follies of all time, and in absolutely a bridge that seems to go on forever to link this tiny island full of rich people with the mainland. Anyway, Trump supporters had yard signs stuck in the grass saying racism lives here. Yeah. So what is the reaction to the police? Well, the police told KNSD radio that placing a sign in someone else's yard may be unwanted, but it is not a crime. It reminds me of that scene from Fletch where there's a stolen car. Chevy Chase gets in this car, this young kid, this terrified kid, and but this is a stolen car. And Fletch says, there have been a lot of changes in the law. I don't even know whether that's a crime anymore. Yes, is anything a crime in California anymore? Good news in the economy. Jobless claims dropped to 751,000, better than expected. The initial claims number is the lowest since March. And the big story from CNBC, Jeff Cox, U.S. GDP booms at 33.1% rate in the third quarter, better than expected. The estimate was 32%. A surge in business and residential investment, along with stronger consumer activity, helped the economy after its worst ever quarter in Q2. It's good news, right? Significant news, you would think. Certainly much better than the news that is coming from Europe. Let's see what Paul Krugman has to say. He is a Nobel laureate, so he is a super smart guy. Obligatory tweet on GDP report. Everyone knew it would be a big number. It's telling us about the rapid but partial snapback of late spring, early summer. Growth has slowed a lot since then. We're still far from a full recovery. Nobody cares. Americans are often called conspiracy theorists or rednecks or worse for saying that the elite hates their guts. Well, the elite does hate their guts, and Paul Krugman can't be bothered to hide his hatred. J5 Killer responded, nobody cares, says the little man with the make work sinecure. Chrissy Teigen, or Teigen, I don't know how it's pronounced. This is the woman who used to be a model and now is sort of a professional wife. She's a professional Instagrammer. And I guess she's subverting our expectations of what beauty means. And she only started doing this after she got fat. And then she started teasing us all with her crisis pregnancy, and the worst came to the worst. And yeah, why don't you show us a picture of your dead baby? And gotta keep those clicks. Chrissy, this is from the Mail. Chrissy Teigen frantically deletes stupid Twitter clips from her account when she realizes Hillary Clinton follows her. Her words came after Hillary reposted Chrissy's heartbreaking essay about her son Jack's stillbirth, leading Chrissy to feel embarrassed that she would then view some of her less serious content. Chrissy, 34, has subsequently posted a video complaining about the absence of a pretty filter on Instagram, which blurs skin in photos to make it look flawless. She said, quote, "What happened while I've been gone to the pretty filter? The simple one. It wasn't too much. You could make it warm. Where is it? I leave for an effing month and the pretty filter's gone," unquote. Was that what they call celebrity problems? No, there is no limit to the shamelessness of these people. So it is 5:30. Oh, before I go to Theater Thursday, let's have a look at the chat. Metal Mics, yeah, okay. I read that already. Okay. Metatron says, "I thought viruses were like mosquitoes just flying around in below 30 temperatures waiting to get on you." Yeah. Mead. No, I've never tried mead. We talked about that. Kombucha, I have never tried that. It doesn't sound particularly appetizing. Krasner's father was a yippie quasi-terrorist, wasn't he? Says Chogokin 666. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. Jamie Raskin's father was a crypto commie. Chogokin 666. Frank Rizzo, the mayor of Philadelphia, bombed an entire neighborhood in the MOVE stand-up. Was that when he was mayor? Because I remember following that story. MOVE was a group of black radical separatists in Philadelphia, and they were causing trouble in their community. Like, everyone hated them, and they were terrified of them. And it was a typical liberal response to what was initially a small problem. That there were complaints, nothing happened. There were complaints, nothing happened. More complaints, nothing happened. More complaints, nothing happened. And the city decided to firebomb an entire block of houses. Tricky Woo says trespassing is usually what police arrest people for when they don't really have a reason. Yes, Tegan profited off her dead baby. Neil Terry says, "I can't believe Krugman is as incompetent as his record suggests. I think he's just a paid propagandist, paid to be professionally wrong." Didn't he come up on Barry? I believe, just give me a second here, indulge me here. Our Chechen, Noho Hank, I believe, was he given a book? Was it, who wrote The Olive and the Lexus Tree? Hang on. Let's see. Just a second here. Won't take long. No, that's by Thomas Friedman. Yeah. Noho Hank imagines himself at a round table with Thomas Friedman. And he says something like, this is a dream. He says something like, "You are stupid and nobody likes you," which is rather my view of Thomas Friedman, also of Paul Krugman. But let's get to the movie here. It's from 1963. It's an MGM film, and it is called The Haunting. I have a long history with this film. As mentioned previously, I didn't see very many films in the theater growing up. We weren't really a theater-going family. But I watched a lot of movies on TV. And the interesting thing is that Peter Blegvad once wrote a cartoon about this, that the TV experience of watching this tiny, fuzzy, 4x3 box, that if you've seen the films afterwards, on Blu-ray, on the widescreen or whatever, or in a revival in a movie house, your childhood memories become transfigured because you can't imagine, what it looked like. But The Haunting used to appear on a television all the time, and I watched it several times, and it scared me to death. I think that and Seconds were the two most frightening films I saw in the 1960s. And I once challenged myself to sit in a room alone with the light off, watching The Haunting, and I failed the challenge. I just, keep in mind, this is, even with commercial interruptions, I found myself leaping off the couch, running to the light, and opening the door. That's how frightening I found it. I should just mention right off the top that this film is available in Blu-ray from Warner Brothers, and the transfer is absolutely outstanding. I was really kind of shocked. Movies of this kind of stature, commercial stature, they're often not treated very well when they come to Blu-ray. Maybe it was just the materials were in excellent shape, but it just leaps off the screen. And let's see, you can get it at Amazon for not that much money. Why is it default? I click on Amazon.com and it defaults to Amazon.ca. Oh, that is just wonderful. But it is a region-free Blu-ray, and there's one major feature. It has commentary from Robert Wise, the director and producer, Nelson Gidding, the screenwriter, and stars Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, and Russ Tamblyn. So it's a haunted house movie. And it's not, your eccentric uncle has left you a large inheritance, but you must spend a night in the haunted house. It's not quite like that. There is a patina of scientific respectability added to it. Richard Johnson plays an anthropologist with a very strong interest, a primary interest in parapsychology. And he has heard of a home, a Hill House, which is long rumored to be a haunted house, an evil house, as he calls it. Why is it that I found this movie so frightening then and now? Well, because my idea of the greatest horror would be to lose my mind, to go insane. And I've long believed that insanity is a communicable disease. And this is, to a very large extent, what The Haunting is about. It's also about the idea of the numinous and of suggestibility. And I've always been highly susceptible to the numinous. I know even today, this is not a movie that I would watch before I went to bed, because I would be terrified of horrible nightmares. Now, Robert Wise, let's talk a little bit about Robert Wise. He was one of the greatest, certainly most successful directors in Hollywood history. He is not considered to be an auteur. They call him a journeyman director. But there are few directors in the history of pictures who have made as many good films as he did. He began working as an editor, and he edited Citizen Kane, for which he was nominated for an Oscar, and he edited The Magnificent Ambersons. He worked in all manner of genre, and he worked in the horror genre as early as 1944. Where he directed a film called The Curse of the Cat People, starring Simone Simon, which is a follow-up to Cat People, although it is a very much a different film. And it is one of Val Lewton's great films. It is a beautiful and mysterious film. He made The Body Snatcher. But I suppose he's best known for two films that he won 4 Oscars for producer and director: West Side Story in 1961 and The Sound of Music in 1965.
He made the great science fiction classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still, in 1951. And his last film, or close to the last film, was the first Star Trek film, Star Trek the Motion Picture, which is rated highly by Trekkies, of which I am not one. This film is in black and white, which I think is entirely appropriate to a gothic horror film. Now, it is widescreen, extremely widescreen. Aspect ratio 2.4 to 1. You know, a lot of directors really resisted widescreen when it came, because they got used to composing in the 4:3 ratio. And the question was, I know that William Wyler thought that, you know, you'd have to use tricks in order to fill the screen, because that is the big problem. How do you fill the screen? Well, Robert Wise, in this film, he accomplishes this magnificently, and I should mention the outstanding cinematography by Davis Bolton. He fills the screen by use of deep focus, which was, if not invented, then certainly brought to the fore by Greg Toland, the DP on, Citizen Kane. Typically, in motion picture shots, you have a focus on the main person or persons or thing or things, and then as the shot goes out, it becomes less and less distinct. Well, deep focus uses lighting to make all the parts of what is on the screen as visible as everything else. In many of the shots in this, you will see Julie Harris, say, in a corner of the screen, and you will see the house. You will see Hill House, or you will see other members of the cast, but they're prominent. And the use of Hill House in this movie, again, is extraordinary. I mean, in a haunted house, you want a great haunted house. And this movie was filmed in England, and it was shot at Ettington Park in Warwickshire. It's now a hotel. It is an enormous pile, and I'm looking at a picture of it here as it appears now. But what did Wise do? Well, he used infrared photography to film Hill House, and he also used an exceedingly experimental widescreen lens. And this is a well-known story that Panavision, they required him to sign a disclaimer because such was the nature of how wide it was, that it induced a lot of distortion into the shots. But Robert Wise and his DP decided that this would be excellent, because you often hear that, I don't know, some sort of object is a character in the film. Well, Hill House is one of the stars, perhaps the biggest star of The Haunting, because Wise and his DP Davis Bolton, they make this house both outside and inside look absolutely terrifying. I should also note there is tremendous use of zoom photography in The Haunting, particularly snap zoom. There's one particular scene where Julie Harris is out on a stone veranda, and she has the feeling of horror in her midst, and she's looking up the house, and you see the camera just zoom down from the top of the house to where she is as she bends back in horror. It's a really thrilling scene, and there are many other such in this film. Someone asked me about The Exorcist a week or so ago, that my reservations about it, because it fundamentally changed the nature of the horror film. that horror films became about viscera of various kinds. There's no violence in The Haunting. There's no ghosts. We hardly see anything. We hear a lot. The sound design, the sound editing is just exemplary. Perhaps the greatest that I've ever heard. If you're going to have a horror film where you don't see anything and you're relying on the sound, well, the sound has to be outstanding, and indeed it is. I should also mention the editing by Ernest Walter, the art direction and the set decoration, just tremendous. The music was written by Humphrey Searle. Now, you may have noticed this, that most people hate atonal modernist music, but they find it acceptable in movie scores. Ligeti, the Hungarian composer, I don't know that he sold very many records in his life, but people know his music from 2001 and from Eyes Wide Shut, and they seem to be perfectly acceptable, apposite in those contexts. Humphrey Searle was one of the leading modernist composers in Britain in the 20th century, and he was also a scholar. That he was responsible for the Searle system of the catalog of the works of Franz Liszt, of which he was a great devotee. Everything about this film is first rate, absolutely everything. The screenplay is by Nelson Gidding, who wrote the screenplay for the Robert Wise film, I Want to Live, which is a terrific film. It's based on a true story about a woman put to death in a California penitentiary. Susan Hayward won an Oscar for it. Now, Claire Bloom, the lovely English actress Claire Bloom, they hired Mary Quant to design her costumes. And this is really good talent spotting, because Mary Quant was about 2 or 3 years away from becoming the couturier of swinging London. Julie Harris stars in this film, and she is best known as a theater actress, and I suppose in 1963 she could be seen as the grande dame, or certainly one of the grandes dames of the American theater. That you see that she has a much less naturalistic approach to acting than the others in the film, which works perfectly, because Julie Harris's character Eleanor is a very strange person. I noted, not for the first time, the elegance and the precision of Julie Harris's diction. And I guess by the 1960s, this was dying out. That upper-class Americans and aspirant Americans, they used to speak with this precise and elegant diction, because you didn't want to sound like a prole. But prole speak rolled over America in the 1960s. I mean, you could see this going back to the 1940s with the rise of the method actors like that mumbler, Marlon Brando. But it is very pleasing to see in Julie Harris an exemplar of the old school. I mentioned Claire Bloom. Richard Johnson, another English actor, he plays the anthropology professor who is arranged for these people to be at the haunted house. He is quite good in this. It's a difficult role to play because there's a temptation to slide into camp. His performance is rather arch, but it never really goes too far. And one is quite taken in by his genuine enthusiasm for his subject. Russ Tamblyn plays the fourth member, and he was in action roles for the most part. He was a handsome and athletic young man. He didn't want to do the film because he thought it was too much of a comical character, but he adds a necessary lightness, comic relief, if you will. There's a fair amount of comic relief in this film, and this is a good thing, again, because horror movies have become relentlessly horrible all the time, which becomes boring. But you can see the casting is so good, because you have this kind of, menage a trois going on with Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, and Richard Johnson, that you see Claire Bloom is, black-haired beauty, whereas Julie Harris is a mousy blonde, and Richard Johnson is a handsome, dark-haired man. So you see that triptych. But you also see two diptychs as well, that you have the two light-haired, light-skinned characters, Julie Harris and Russ Tamblyn, versus the two dark-skinned, dark-haired characters, Claire Bloom and Richard Johnson. I should notice that I'm sure this is an accident. Maybe it wasn't an accident, but you see, there's several scenes in this film which could be seen as homages to Alfred Hitchcock's films. Julie Harris, she has led a sheltered life. She has wasted the flower of her womanhood, looking after her tyrannical mother. And after her mother dies, she finds herself living in a household with her sister, her husband, and her child, where they don't want her, where she seems to be little more than a slave. And she has this, she wants an adventure. She wants a great adventure. And it reminds me very much of the beginning of Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, where Teresa Wright's character in their small town in California, she says, we just sort of go along and nothing happens. We're in a terrible rut. It's been on my mind for months. What's going to be our future? Oh, come now, Charlie. Things aren't as bad as that. And how can you talk about money when I'm talking about souls? We eat and sleep, and that's about all. Yes, Teresa Wright wants a big adventure, and she gets a big adventure. And perhaps if she had known what she was in for, she would have been satisfied with her boring wife and her loving family. Near the beginning of the film, we see Julie Harris make her great escape from her oppressive family. And this very much reminds me of Psycho, where Janet Leigh makes her great escape from Phoenix. And again, if she had known what this was going to lead to, perhaps she wouldn't have made the great mistake. Now, the caretaker of Hill House very much reminds me of Hitchcock's film Rebecca, of the housekeeper at Manderley, Mrs. Danvers. There's even something of a facial relationship. Now, even the small parts in this film are really well cast. Marquay's wife, this is the anthropology professor, the ghost hunter, turns out to be Lois Maxwell, who you might know as Miss Moneypenny. The caretaker of Hill House is played by the actress Rosalie Crutchley, who had a very distinctive, one might say, terrifying face. And Faye Compton, one of the grand dames of the British stage, plays Russ Tamblyn's aunt, the woman who owns the house, and Faye Compton's little turn as the wise old bird is really quite delightful. Faye Compton, interestingly enough, was the brother of the author, the novelist, best-selling novelist, Compton Mackenzie, who also founded the Gramophone magazine. Now, the beginning of the film, there's a lot of voiceover in this film, and I know that Brian Cox's character and adaptation says that never, never use voiceover. Many of the greatest films have extensively used voiceover, and this is not an exception. And we get voiceover. There's two kinds of voiceover. We get the professor's voiceover at the beginning, and then Julie Harris's voiceover. And Julie Harris's voiceover, I mean, only a great actress could pull this off without sounding, self-conscious or, again, camp. We know what she is thinking as she is thinking it. Now, Richard Johnson's voiceover, there's a rather lengthy prologue, I suppose you could say. About the first 15 minutes of the film is pretty much a narrative dump, where we learn about the history of Hill House, all of the disasters which have been attendant upon it. And then in the scene where the professor meets Faye Compton, we get even more of this. But all of the narrative is pretty much gotten out of the way in those 15 minutes. And with the opening, we see just how terrifying Hill House is. And, we know that something horrible is going to happen. So we can sit through the narrative dump because it's a pretty interesting story that the man who built the house, it was a tremendous folly because his wife died before she even saw it. And then his daughter, largely, he left. She grew up alone and she stayed in the nursery for her entire life. And she was attended upon by a woman who neglected her and led to her death. And feeling guilty, she inherited the house. Feeling guilty, she went to the balcony on top of the top of a wrought iron spiral staircase, much of which is made in the film. Oh, this is the other Hitchcock, a possible Hitchcock reference. Because the extraordinarily vertiginous nature of the spiral staircase in The Haunting, of course, reminds us of the vertiginous nature, the vertigo, as it were, of the spiral staircase in the film Vertigo. Yes, Robert Wise gets a lot out of a little. For instance, in the spiral staircase scene, where we just see a bolt about to come out of the wall and the spiral staircase shaking. This movie was remade by Jan de Bont, in 1999. I've only seen the trailer. It's just a CGI disaster, and all the subtlety in the acting is obviously, they have no need for such subtlety. Julie Harris, she's had a terrible life, and it seems she is the very definition of highly strung, right from the very beginning. She's a sympathetic character, but you can see that she has inherited, it would seem, much of the irascibility of her mother. She acts in an ugly fashion many times in this film. Often she's provoked, but she's one of those people who is unable to recognize a joke. And in terms of casting, if you see the Crane, the man who built Hill House, you see the depiction of his young daughter becomes an adult as she lives in the nursery. You see the extraordinary resemblance between this woman and Julie Harris. So you have the four people in the house, and there's all this talk about psychic phenomenon and the like. And so the professor is there to investigate it, and they have been chosen. Well, the women have been chosen because of their susceptibility to the numinous. Claire Bloom has ESP, but very cleverly, the film suggests that she's just very good at reading
people, of picking up on social cues, tones of voice, or what would be logical for such a character. Claire Bloom's character is strongly suggested to be a lesbian. That at one point, Julie Harris, who was furious with her, calls her one of nature's mistakes. There's a scene where Russ Tamblyn, who plays the nephew as kind of an overgrown frat boy. You see, he's wearing a blazer with a crest on it, and he's interested in girls, he's interested in cars, and he's interested in liquor. And he makes a move on Claire Bloom, and she rejects him angrily, which could be because she's a lesbian, but it could be because, well, she's not some dumb sorority girl. Despite her putative lesbianism, Claire Bloom, and one must commend her for the subtlety of this performance, she is jealous of Richard Johnson's attachment to Julie Harris, because Julie Harris is a far more numinous person than Claire Bloom is. And you see Claire Bloom rather taking her away. You know, you belong to me. You don't belong to the professor. The professor rightfully belongs to me because I'm the one with ESP. And we see Claire Bloom needling Julie Harris throughout this film. And it's quite cruel to observe. There's several lines which are spoken rather offhand. For instance, a reference made by Russ Tamblyn to Bridie Murphy. Bridie Murphy was an American woman of the last century, mid-century, who became an absolute sensation because she claimed to be the reincarnation of an Irish peasant woman called Bridie Murphy. And there was Bridie Murphy fever in America. Well, there was a movie made, constant jokes. It went on for, I don't know, 10 or 15, 20 years. At another point, Claire Bloom refers to Julie Harris as Isolde, which is very cruel indeed. You know, the doomed romantic heroine. But there's no question, well, sacrificing a virgin. We see that in a lot of horror plots, and it's arguable, almost certain, that Claire Bloom and Julie Harris are both virgins. That is to say, they have never had sexual intercourse with a man. So this brings up the suggestion that one or both of them is to be sacrificed. Some more about the photography and the direction. That the professor explains that Crane, Hugh Crane, the man who designed this house, was an eccentric. He didn't like to follow rules, you see, like the rules about right angles when building a house. So there are no proper right angles. So everything seems distorted, which is why doors are constantly opening and closing on their own. And the photographic techniques, the Dutch angles that are used, the German expressionist techniques, and the use of the distortion via the lens that Robert Wise employed, it shows you a house which is totally distorted. And there's so much economy there. There's no need for CGI. With some simple camera work and simple camera angles, you can show a house in which something is completely askew. I'm reminded of another theme when Julie Harris is fleeing in terror. She's often fleeing in terror in this film. And she gets wrapped up in a curtain. And it's just such a beautiful scene because it brings to mind a burial shroud. How does this movie treat the idea of the parapsychology?
Well, to steal a joke from Futurama, mumbo, perhaps, jumbo, perhaps not. Now, Richard Johnson is an enthusiast. Russ Tamblyn is very much a skeptic. The professor's wife is even more of a skeptic. She thinks it's all nonsense. But again, the power of suggestibility. If 5 people had ended up in this place and no one had told them of its history or its supposed power, would anything likely have happened? No. But since they have been informed, since this germ has been planted in their minds about this house of horrors, you can't stop thinking about it. But what is perhaps most powerful about this film psychologically is the idea that it is Julie Harris's character who has brought the evil into the house, that she has infected everyone with her madness, and she has summoned the forces that scare everyone to death. So I'm not going to give away the ending here. It's a very satisfying ending, although I would have been tempted to be a little more subtle in the final reveal. But I guess the decision was made that, you can't really expect people watching a movie to remember something that happened, 105 minutes ago, say. So I'll forgive that. The ending is very satisfying indeed. And so top-notch horror film, one of the greatest ever made. Martin Scorsese put it on his list as the 7th scariest movie ever made. So if you don't believe me, perhaps you will believe him. But I can't recommend this highly enough. I'll just say this, though. If you're going to watch a horror film, there have to be certain conditions, okay? You need to watch it in a quiet room. You need to be free of distractions. You don't have to be alone, but if you're the kind of person that likes to comment on the film as it's happening or to make jokes, well, it's not going to work. And you should be sober because it simply doesn't work after you've had a few. I just wanted to check this about The Haunting at Amazon.com. I'm just more than a little irritated that I don't know, my browser has decided, or Amazon itself has decided that since I live in Canada, I wouldn't possibly buy anything from Amazon.com, which of course is absurd. But no, that's going to have to remain a mystery. So final look at the chat. Oh dear, I've got that cancer look on. How about if I turn this light off here? Does that make any difference? Okay, it makes a difference. Maybe not particularly good difference. Enron says spiral staircases are cool. You wouldn't catch me going up that staircase in The Haunting. Nope, not going to do it. Is there really a necessity for a spiral staircase? I'm thinking if you put a spiral staircase in a house, particularly one that narrow, you've made some design errors. Neil Terry says, really need to stop sacrificing virgins. We're running out. Halper says, the great thing about the cinema is that there's no pause button. That is absolutely true. Particularly, I'll just pause the movie because, maybe someone has sent me a message. Or maybe, something interesting is happening on the internet. No, it should be an immersive, all-in experience. Okay, Amron says, I'd put one in my house. Okay. Sooner you than me. Haven't we all had terrible lives, says Donald Robertson. Okay, sure, to a certain extent. But see, Julie Harris is a pathetic person, and I mean that in the true sense of the world, because she is clearly a very sensitive person, and her sensitivity has been ignored or worse, trampled throughout her entire life. KMG, per the commentary, the Harrison Bloom characters were lesbians. There is nothing in the original Haunting to suggest that Julie Harris is a lesbian, and her strong erotic attachment to the professor and her anger. She is just almost destroyed when she finds out that the professor is married. This strongly suggests that she is not at all a lesbian. Max Vitriol says, why is his shot of a distorted, curved hallway with the character approaching the camera was used again in The Andromeda Strain, which is also a fine film. Matt Beck says Russ Tamblyn was Gideon in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Yes, a very athletic man he was. Okay, so that's it for today. What's coming up on a Theater Thursday? Just let me refresh my profile and go to the top. Oh, yes, a comedy next week, a sad comedy. It's by Michael Ritchie, 1975, and it is called Smile, and it stars Bruce Dern. I've always thought that Bruce Dern has been misunderstood because he's typically, described as being crazy, mad, deranged. He seems bemused to me. If you look at him, going back to his television performances, the movies he always seems to play a character who doesn't quite understand what's really going on. And so he does in Smile, which is about a small town California beauty pageant with an outstanding ensemble cast. Many people who became quite well known this was at the beginning of their career. Tomorrow, which is the day before Halloween, is the book club, and I will be discussing Evelyn Waugh's 1948 novel, The Loved One, which could be described as a poison pen letter from England to America. And never the twain shall meet is one of the notes that Waugh wrote before he began. Waugh was a man who wrote largely from personal experience, and there were two occasions in his career when he was absolutely delighted that from out of left field, some great new experience occurred to him, and he went to Hollywood after the Second World War, after the enormous success of Brideshead Revisited, which sold something like 250,000 books in hardcover in its first year. And so Hollywood wanted to make a film of Brideshead Revisited. It never happened. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But Waugh was interested. He was introduced to Forest Lawns, which he thought was absolutely amazing, which it is. Later, he went on a ocean voyage to the Orient, and he had a psychotic break due to his overuse of drugs such as chloral hydrate, which became the basis of the ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, much appreciated always, but especially at this time. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can donate directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.